Hey, what's up everybody? This is Clint and for today's video, what I wanted to talk about was short stack play in sit and goes. Typically, I get, my inspiration, I guess you could say, for making the next video based upon what's coming up in my Skype group, what's going on in my coaching sessions, what seem to be the hot topics. And in recent coaching sessions that I've been doing, um, a common issue that's been coming up has been the issue of short stack play. And by short stacked, I mean five big blinds, six big blinds, seven big blinds. Certainly when you get less than 10 big blinds. But for today's discussion, typically in the four, five, six, seven big blind territory. Um, and for today, I'm going to be going through some hand history examples to illustrate exactly what I'm talking about. And we're going to do it utilizing some chip EV examples, some dollar EV examples, specifically on the bubble of an 18-man. But regardless of what type of game it is, the concepts are going to apply to a variety of game types. Pretty much any game type where ICM plays a role, from 6 max, 9 man, 18 mans to 45 mans. ICM isn't as big of a situation in 180 mans, but it can still play a role when you're dealing with some pay jumps on the final table. Um, so, short stack play, and let me jump to the next slide and talk about it. Um, we all get short stacked. No matter how good you are, at some point you're going to find yourself in a game where you have five big blinds for whatever reason. Who cares what the reason? You're there now. Um, and when you're there, when you're in that, I'll call the five big blind area the desperation zone, because typically, it's been a very common belief or widely held truth that once you get around five big blinds, or if you get any lower than five big blinds, you pretty much lose your fold equity, right? Anytime you shove all in, the big blind, at least the big blind, will typically have some pot odds to call with a very wide range, if not any two cards, profitably, especially in a chip EV scenario where you're purely just looking at pot odds. Um, so we want to do our best not to get blinded out. And when we talk about blinded out, again, we're talking about the situation where you no longer have fold equity. So if you're sitting with five or six big blinds, you better try to get your stack all in a good spot to help yourself stay afloat. And that concept of staying afloat is a key one because, like I said, we all get short stack, but how we get, how we can chip up, build our stack, I think that's a key area that really differentiates, really good players from your average players, and obviously from your losing players, is the ability to, even when you get short, not to panic, but to find really good spots to get your chips in the middle and hopefully chip up. And when I say really good spots, that doesn't always mean a plus EV scenario, because when you get short, there are many times where you might have to take a negative EV play in order to preserve your future, more plus EV plays in the future. And for those that have seen a lot of my videos, I do get into calculations a lot to justify certain plays. I use Cardrunners EV a lot, Sit and Go Wizard, variety of other ICM calculators. I use those to, again, justify plays because it's one thing to talk about something in theory, it's another to justify it. So I always try to justify it with calculations. For today's uh, for today's video here, that is going to be a little bit more difficult to do in terms of justifying based upon numbers, because when we start talking about negative EV plays as it applies to, having a better, putting yourself in a better situation for the future, when we start talking about the future, we start talking about the unknown. Who's to know what's going to happen in the future? What's our edge with in the future? So it's much more difficult to find an exact calculation for that. But I think understanding intuitively what we're trying to accomplish, I think that's all that really matters. And especially when I've brought this situation up to other regs and gotten their opinion, I've gotten so many different opinions. So I'm kind of basing this on, obviously, my own experience from playing. And a lot of this will come from your own experience. If you're just starting out, this concept of negative EV plays and trying to figure out how negative of an EV play we should make, it might be a little bit of a difficult concept. I'm going to try to break it down into its basics. But certainly, as you've been playing a lot and you get used to figuring out, how wide you should get in certain shove spots with a short stack, that's really going to play an important role, when identifying or when trying to improve your short stack play. So, like I said, when I was talking to a lot of different regs about this, I got all sorts of different answers in terms of how they handle it. And like I said, I'm going to use my own experience. I'm going to incorporate some of the stuff that they said, and hopefully we can come up with some, hopefully we come up with some, not necessarily rules of thumb, because as you'll see as we're going through, there's not going to be a specific rule that we're going to be following, other than when you start getting short, 8, 7, 6 big blinds or fewer, you need to start looking at chipping up and taking some negative EV plays. And when we get into the specific hand histories, I'll start talking. I will start talking about what some of the other regs have suggested and how to figure out what you should be doing. Um, so I talked a little bit about ICM calculators and doing calculations and how I like to use them. But when it comes to analyzing your own game, and as you're flipping through your game and you see a 5, 6 big blind shove, and you say, hey, should I have shoved this, 10-9 offsuit hand from middle position? Was that a plus EV shove or not? And an issue is that when you put that hand into, let's say, ICMizer, and it shows you the graph or the grid of all the hands you should be shoving all in, with given that situation, and it'll pretty much give you everything. If you don't adjust your edge, it's going to give you everything that's a plus EV shove. And I think it's a mistake. I think ICM calculators, and it's not the calculator's fault. It's more human error, because we need to have an understanding of what we're really trying to accomplish. But if you're just relying on these calculators, it could be costing you money, in the sense that if you're just looking for a plus EV shove, let's say when you have 5 big blinds, you're not going to be opening up with a wide enough range to give yourself a shot at chipping up. Okay? We want to get out of that desperation zone. We want to, try to stay afloat in this game. Not every game are you going to be picking up ace king and pocket aces and doubling up and having a good stack for the entire game. But that doesn't mean when you get to 5 and 6 big blinds that the game is over either. If you think about just improving this part of your game, and if you can find yourself in the money maybe one extra time a session, by improving your ability to chip up, think about how many more in the money scenarios you've put yourself in if it's one time a session, maybe a couple times a day, several more times a week, and over the course of a month. That's a lot of money that can add up that you might be leaving on the table by not playing a proper 5 and 6 big blind game, which I think is an area that's overlooked, because we kind of feel desperate. Oh, we'll just shove it all in and hope for the best. And while that actually probably is something you have to do, is kind of just shove, hope, and pray, there are some specific spots to look for to give yourself a better opportunity at chipping up and not putting yourself in a really terrible situation, like blinding yourself out. And also, I'll talk a little bit about tricks of the trade. Some tricky things you can do when you're short stacked, so that maybe you get a few extra folds, or you pick up chips with uncontested. So we'll talk about those towards the end. But what I'm going to do is I want to jump into examples. I think that's the best way to kind of start discussing what we should be looking at. And like I said, when we're talking about short stack shoves, I'm typically talking about areas where we will need to start taking some negative EV plays. That's typically below 8 big blinds. Now, game flow is extremely important. Who are the other players at the table? Especially like if you're around the bubble and you've got 5 or 6 big blinds and there's other regs that are really good, and maybe there's one big stack who's really abusing the table, so you're not even getting a chance to shove. That situation is going to be much different compared to, let's say you're on a bubble in the same exact scenario, and the other players at the table maybe are more recreational players, and they're not abusing the table. You're getting plenty of opportunities to shove all in. because maybe they're folding and they're just not playing like they should around the bubble, that you're going to be looking to play a much different game in that scenario. So game flow is extremely important. To get into all the variables of game flow is going to be difficult. We need a lot more time than just this one video. But I'll try to address what you should be looking for as we go through some of these examples. So with that being said, why don't we just jump right into it? All right, so what I'm going to be using here are some games from... Sorry. Okay, so for the examples, we're going to be using our some hands from a recent coaching session that I did, and this is you'll see I changed his name, 18-man hero. These are going to be 18-man games, but regardless of whether you're playing an 18-man or not, like this is pre-final table, so we're going to be dealing in more chip EV terms since we're obviously very far away from the money. So this certainly applies to your 45-man games, your 180-man games, 9-man games. Obviously, you're dealing with ICM right away. We'll talk a little bit more about some ICM scenarios in a bit, but in general, the concepts are going to apply. So he has pocket kings here. We won't go through the hand, but essentially he loses a big pot where essentially an ace hurt him a bit on the river. So he's here facing, he's looking at this game now, and he's got 480 chips at big blind 30. I know that's usually kind of a depressing feeling, thinking, you're kind of dead already, but that's okay. All right. It's important that we just find good spots to chip up. Okay, we got a long way to go. You chip up a couple times, you get a double up, you're right back in it. That's really how you have to start looking at these things. So what I want to do is start flipping forward, and actually, I meant to write this down in one of the slides, but I'll talk about it now instead. There are a few key things that you can do to figure out when you need to start shoving a little bit wider, okay? Or when you need to take a negative EV shove that ICM calculators can't take into account. And that's specifically, again, the future. So what's the future? The future is, when are the blinds going up? When are the blinds going to hit me? Okay, so those are two things you really need to pay attention to, because right now, we've got just about 10 big blinds at big blind 50. But what you need to be doing is look at your info tab in your game and see when the blinds are going up. If the blinds are going up in less than 1 minute, if it says in 1 minute or less than 1 minute, then probably, if you're in this situation, by the time the blinds get to you, it's going to be big blind 100, and you no longer have 10 big blinds, you have 5 big blinds. Completely changes things. Okay, so what that means is, if you see that the blinds are going up in less than 1 minute, you need to probably shove, this is the time where I would look to take a negative EV shove. Or I'd be thinking to myself, and not getting into specifics of how negative EV, I'd be saying to myself, the next time it's folded to me, I really need to look to get it all in. Now, if it's folded to me, would I shove 9-5 suited? No, I'm not going to do that. It's too terrible of a hand. 9-8 suited? Certainly. 5-6 suited, I am probably going to be getting that in. Okay, so I will be shoving a wide range, and we'll do a little bit of calculations here in a second. But I just want to talk a little bit about game flow, because those are all things you need to take into account. When are these blinds going up? So 3-6 offsuit, we're not going to shove, and you might be thinking, okay, we still got 10 big blinds. 10-6 off, we're still okay. The blinds went up. Now it's a big blind 100, and it's a totally different scenario now. You have 5 big blinds. So that's what I mean. You might be saying to yourself, well, I have 10 big blinds right now. The question is, are you going to have 10 big blinds by the time the blinds come around and hit you? If they just turn to 25-50, you know what? We actually don't need to get as desperate right away. We could probably, obviously, wait in orbit. We don't need to shove really wide. But if they've been 25-50 for a little while, which obviously they have been, and it's going to be big blind 100 before it hits you, that's where you need to start saying to yourself, when it's folded to me, I need to really look to try to get it all in, barring having an awful hand, the bottom 40% of your hands. So here we get 10-9 suited. Okay, so the question is, should we shove? Now I look at this and say instant shove, right? Our hero here, he folded, and I really disagree with that fold, because let's go into a calculation first. So let me pull this up. So I pulled this from one of the the games, and I just put in chip EV mode. It doesn't matter if it says what it is. Chip EV is chip EV, and you see the edge. So if you're using a calculator, this is what you want to pay attention to. It's pay attention to edge. Okay, so 10-9 suited apparently actually has a plus EV edge anyway. So if you can find a break even or plus EV spot with 5 big blinds, then by all means you have to take it. So folding this would be bad in that sense, not even considering taking a negative EV shove. But if we pull this back up, I'm absolutely going to be taking a negative EV shove here, so that when the blinds go through me, I'm not sitting there with 2.5 big blinds now, 3.5 big blinds. So what we can do is take a look. What kind of edge would we look for? This is where everybody kind of has a discrepancy in terms of what kind of negative edge do we want to start taking, and this is very subjective. It's much easier to. I have a much easier time doing this with dollar EV, but we can still do it with chip EV. I would probably look for around like a negative 25, negative 30, something like that. But I mean, if you're really looking for this for a specific range, I would take a look at the hands and figure out, okay, we're shoving through an entire table, and that's the other thing. Another thing that plays a role. Sorry, I keep kind of jumping back and forth. Another thing that plays a role in terms of game flow is is your table a 5 or 6 man table, or is it an 8 or 9 man table? Obviously, it makes a difference. We can shove certainly much wider, and we need to shove much wider at the shorter table because blinds are going to hit us quicker. Whereas here, even if the blinds do hit us, we have some more hands that we can hopefully pick up a half decent hand. And that will also determine your edge a little bit. So I would look at the hands here and say, okay, what's this telling me to shove? If it's negative 28, would I shove Queen Deuce? I'm not sure if I would. Certainly any suited connector, I would be shoving Queen 8 off. I would be shoving 9-7. I would be shoving these types of hands. I'd probably actually fold the Queen Deuce, to be honest with you. These types of hands, like even the 8-6, they're going to perform well versus your typical calling ranges, which are going to include, aces, kings, stuff like that. So you're typically going to do okay. But it's something in that range, in the 45% range, 50% range is what I would shove here. So again, it's tough to calculate. Some might say, oh, you have to take even a bigger edge. Go to a full negative, half a big blind. I think that's way too wide. But I think just looking for a break-even spot, if you're looking at this and it says, here's what you should shove, I think you're doing yourself a disservice as well by eliminating some of these hands to shove. So I would take a slight negative EV spot there. I would be shoving any suited connector really down the Queen 8 off, King 5 off, stuff like that. So this is one of those spots that you might be missing, that you should be shoving to help give yourself a chance to stay afloat. Because if not, this is really what happens. Okay, now you're this short, and then obviously this person folds there, which is just incredible to me. Obviously, he's not a winning player. But like this spot here, our hero folded, Queen 4 off from the button. I'm absolutely shoving Queen 4 here. We probably actually, this is where you really need to pay attention to the other players at the table. Who are you shoving through? Now, Poker at Luffy D is a solid winning reg. He's in the small blind with a nice stack, but I also look at the big blind. We can actually do a little damage to the big blind. The big blind might feel that he doesn't have to call ultra wide. He's still got a little bit of a stack to play with. 7.5 big blinds. So this is actually a good stack to shove into, because you probably have a little bit of fold equity. If you have an ounce of fold equity there, that's all you can really hope for. And yeah, you might have to shove here, close your eyes, hope and pray. But that's kind of the situation you're faced with. So I'd be saying to myself now, okay, the blinds are through us. We got 4.5 big blinds. Anytime it's folded to me, I need to be shoving all in, because it's obviously better to be shoving all in through less players, less of an opportunity to pick up a good hand. Simply having Queen high, you might be pretty good here. So I would absolutely shove here. Absolutely. He picks up Ace King. That's all well and good. 6-5 suited with 6 big blinds now. Now, again, the question is, are the blinds going to go up before they? That's the question. So it's been big blind 100 for about a full orbit. You know, depending upon how quickly the tables were going, this might be going up to 75, 150. So, and obviously the blinds are about to hit you, which ICM calculators really can't take into account. I think Hold'em Resources might take into account that the blinds are coming around. They can take into account some future value. But again, I'm not getting bogged down by specific calculations. I'm looking at this with more of like a common sense point of view. We're short. We need to shove. Let's do it with a half decent hand. If we get called here, our hand's doing okay. But we need to get ourselves to a manageable stack, 7, 8, 9 big blinds, to where we have some more fold equity. We're not in the total desperation zone. And I'm going to find good spots to do that. And 6-5 suited here is a good spot to do that. This is a good spot to get it in. So again, what would I shove here? Kind of similar to what we saw last time when we had the 10-9 suited. You know, King 5 off, Queen 8 off. I don't think I would. I mean, probably like Queen 5 suited. Most suited connectors, obviously any ace, any pocket pair, any Broadway. 10-9 off, I'm certainly shoving. So, you know, 10-9 off. You know, that might not be in the realm of what an ICM calculator might tell you to shove all in, but I'm not too concerned about that. I'm more concerned about, you know, getting my chips in, picking up these blinds, hopefully, before I get blinded out. It's one of the worst things you can do in the game is get blinded out. 5-6 off, you know, just that's obviously not as good of a scenario. So this is so much better spot to shove. You know, obviously you have to shove that in. That's easy enough. So now we do have a manageable stack. Queen 9 suited. He did shove this. This is a good shove here at big blind 150. So that's nice. And I think that was it for this game in terms of illustrating our point. Yeah, I think he shoves pocket sixes and loses. Yeah, that was it. So, but I'm actually going to go to another game here with the same player. So that was a chip EV scenario, pre-final table of an 18-man. I'm going to get to the bubble of an 18-man and really talk about game flow and how that plays a role in what you should be doing in terms of how to play with a short stack. So bear with me 1 second. Let me pull that game up. All right, so this is the next game. Same player. We're at not the bubble yet, but what are we? 6-handed, 7-handed? Yeah, seven-handed. I can't even count. In an 18-man, we're gonna find ourselves at the bubble here soon, I believe. This is a game where our hero had a pretty big stack, lost it in a few standard spots, lost a flip, and found himself getting a little bit short. You know, 7.5 big blinds, 8 big blinds. But this is such a key area because, you know, if you can find a few good spots to get it in, you can again help stay afloat. You know, help yourself stay afloat so that you don't find yourself in a folding battle. That's typically what I see happens way too much, especially around bubbles. And it'll happen in this game where you and another guy are kind of fighting it out for that last position to get into the money. Maybe you both have like 6 big blinds. You're hoping the other guy busts before you. And there's some validity to that, and stack distribution to the table plays a role. But there are also some things you can do to kind of elevate your position at that table so that you put more pressure on the other short stack, figuring that he has to make a move before you or make a real risky move before you. So, so why don't we get into this? So again, if you find yourself in this spot, you know, you have to be so focused on who are the players to my left, who are some good stacks to shove into. You know, we're never going to be that excited to be shoving small blind and the big blind into a 6,000 stack, right? Because they have such a bigger stack than you. They can call and lose and still, they could still be okay. Whereas, you know, I love to shove into these players, other stacks that have that are kind of equal to you, other stacks where you're gonna have the most fold equity against. So I love, you know, maybe you don't want to shove as wide into this 6K stack, but I will shove wide, you know, through that 6K stack when he's in the small blind because they have less of an incentive essentially to call really wide because they still have a player to act behind them. So they're going to call with a more legit range. And we could shove into this other 2K stack because we have the most fold equity against them, even though we're kind of short, so are they, and we could do damage to their stacks. So identifying good stacks to shove into is extremely important. Okay? And this Queen 4 offsuit is a good example. I think our hero here folded it, and like this spot, this needs to be a shove. You know, we're sitting there with about what are we, 7.5 big blinds. This needs to be a shove, and I think this isn't even a negative EV shove. I think when I pulled this up, you know, again, if we just use sit and go wizard really easily, real quickly, even if we give them like roughly 20% calling ranges, you might maybe assume they're a little bit wider, a little bit tighter, something like that. It's still going to be, you know, making them close to 20. It's break even. If you make them a little bit tighter, even just a little bit tighter, I think it changes it dramatically. Yeah, I mean, this is a perfectly good spot to shove. Um, you know, if you have 10 big blinds, 11 big blinds, that's one thing, because you still have a very manageable stack. 7 big blinds, you might feel okay right now, but you're not going to feel okay when the blinds come around again. We're shoving through 2 players. You really want to, you know, maximize your opportunity in these spots. So, um, you really want to maximize your opportunity here and chip up. I mean, there's 600 chips there in the middle that can elevate you close to a 10 big blind stack. These are the spots you cannot be missing. You know, I said it in literally the last video that I made on that $15 180-man league finder video, is that your overall profitability in these games, no matter what game you're playing, is a function of how often you make the correct plays in situations that occur very frequently. Okay, so this is a situation that occurs very frequently. You want to make sure you get it right. So you need to be, you know, saying to yourself, okay, next time it's folded to me, I'm in a good situation. I have a good amount of fold equity against the guy in the big blind. And in terms of who the players are, this guy I remember looking up. He was a recreational player, only about 500 games played. Really wasn't playing a very good game. I believe this player was on the tighter side. So let's just assume that for right now. You know, you definitely want to shove there and pick up those chips. Not a bad spot, king 9 off. But to be quite frank, I'd rather shove queen 4 here through 2 players than king 9 off through 4 players. Alright, so I'm going to flip through, get to, you know, this is close. This 6-7 offsuit, 5 big blinds, or 5.5 big blinds. This might be the spot to get it all in. And this might be a negative EV spot. Let's take a look at it real quick. Just bear with me for a second. Let me find it. All right, so here we are. So here, let me go back to the hand so you can see it clearly without all that stuff going on. About 5.5 big blinds. Now, here's where I'll talk about what other regs say. Some other regs will say, and I've heard this, is that for every big blind below 10, he would drop down negative -0.2 in terms of his edge. When you look at Sit and Go Wizard or ICMizer and you look at your edge, he's willing to take a negative -0.2 edge for every big blind below 10. So a negative, or at 9 big blinds, he would take negative -0.2. All the way down to 5 big blinds, he would take a full negative 1% edge. Now, I think that that's a little bit extreme. I don't go that far with it, but I think having that concept in your mind that, okay, as you start getting 9, 8, 7 big blinds, your edge needs to gradually decrease and obviously go below 0. So what do I usually take in a 5 big blind spot? Again, game flow plays a role. The fact that we're at a a 6-man table, blinds are going to hit me in a couple hands. That plays a role. Obviously, if the blinds were going to go up before they hit me, that's absolutely going to play a role. But -0.3, negative -0.2, negative -0.3, something like that will typically give a half decent range to shove all in, where you're not shoving in deuce 8 offsuit, but you're also not waiting for only good hands either. So you need to say to yourself, I need to chip up here. The stacks to shove into that are in the blinds are pretty good. It's nice to shove into the 10 big blind stack because, yes, we have a 5 big blind stack, but that's half of his stack. So it's a good stack to shove into. If we pick up chips here, then we can survive, another orbit before we're technically in that, blinded out stage. So if we look at this, pull it up. I always adjust ranges, but let's see. I mean, these aren't too bad. I mean, we can lessen them a little bit. Yeah, but if we just look at 6-7 offsuit, it says it's negative 0.17. That's okay to me. See, I think this is where players will just look at, oh, it's a negative EV shove, I can't make it. No, no, no. You need to start making these negative EV shoves to give yourself an opportunity at making plus EV plays in the future. And that means by having 8, 9, 10 big blinds where we can look for plus EV spots. Because if you miss this spot, then you may be forced with a more negative EV spot in several more hands later. So it's a matter of taking the lesser of two evils, I guess you could say. A negative EV spot now or a potential even more negative EV spot later. So that's another way to look at it. So, let's take a look at what this range is saying. I want to do like a negative. Let's see what negative 0.2 says. That's good enough. It's just saying about 57%. It's actually not too bad. Not too bad. Kind of looks similar to what we had before. We were analyzing that 9-10 suited hands. But yeah, something like this would be fine by me. I'd probably shove 6-5, even 6-5 offsuit. I'd pick that spot here. And this it's tough to do calculations because it's very subjective. You're probably going to find other people that might say, "Oh, I'm crazy. You can't take that negative even EV spot." I've been doing this, using this same type of concept for a while. Like I said, I don't want to get inundated with the actual calculation because it's more an intuitive exercise to go through and figuring out what's the best time really to get it all in. Hit the wrong one again. What's the best time to get it all in? Given the situation, okay, given what are the stack sizes to your left, who's to your left, are these guys, calling really loose, really tight, all that's going to play a role, okay, but more importantly, you need to look at when are the blinds coming around, when are they going up, who do you have fold equity against, if this guy in the big blind had like a 12,000 stack, I'm not going to shove as wide into that player. I might be more willing to shove wider the next hand when the 2400 stack is in the big blind, if that makes sense. So this is where you kind of have to identify spots to get in, because if you're just waiting for a good hand at this point, I kind of want you to keep track in your mind. Okay, I think we were a spot here. We had 2200 chips. I think we got around 2200 still. You're quickly going to find yourself, again, this guy limps. I mean, who knows what he's thinking. But you're quickly going to find yourself short-stacked and desperate. So definitely get it in there. So he's been able to pick up some hands to get it in. Now, so here we are. Here we're in the stone cold bubble here of this 18-man. We're kind of battling for that fourth place spot between Pier 63 and our hero here. And again, I'll remind you, this Svaza 888 guy, he is a recreational guy, doesn't really understand how to play. He's only played 500 games, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So this spot, 10-7 offsuit, less than 5 big blinds. Now, what do we have? 4 big blinds. The same goes for this guy. If this Svaza guy was a reg, I would absolutely fold here, because a reg knows that he should shove practically any 2 cards into this guy in the big blind, okay, on the bubble. So I know that there's a potential for them to do battle. So I'm not going to look for negative EV spots. This is where I'm going to kind of sit back and hope that they do battle and we can sneak into the money. Now, if we say that this guy isn't a reg and he doesn't know what he's doing, and therefore he isn't shoving any 2 cards, and in this spot you'll see he does fold, If we knew that this guy was capable of folding, which we will know after this hand, and it will apply for a later hand in a second, then I would shove all in here because now we can't rely on this guy to punish this big blind. All he's going to be doing is giving our direct competition chips, and it's going to kind of force our hand to be in a really bad spot potentially in the next hand or two. So because we can't rely on this guy, we need to essentially take matters into our own hands and take a negative EV spot here. But the negative EV spot has some positive implications. If we can shove, and we do have some fold equity against this guy, if we have fold equity and we pick up this pot, we've done something really good. We've picked up 1,100 chips. Sorry about that. We've picked up 1,100 chips, and we've taken those chips essentially away from this player. So now he's the one that's even more desperate than we are. Okay, so 1,100 chips puts us at a 3,500 stack. Okay, that's a manageable stack now. We're going to be doing okay. Whereas this guy is really desperate. But if the situation's reversed and we fold and this guy gets those chips, that's really bad for us. So 6-8 suited. Again, if these guys were regs, I might be willing to let them do battle. But you know what? 6-8 suited, it's a half decent hand to shove. Even if you get called, you're going to be doing okay. This is where, again, game flow means a lot. Is this peer guy, is he just kind of folding away and as well and hoping to sneak in? If he is, then you can't rely on him to shove all in. So you need to make a move. You need to make a move here. Take your shot. Shove this all in. Again, if you pick up these chips, at least you can stay afloat. Have that in your mind, staying afloat. Because if you don't, here you go. You're sitting here with a 1,700 stack behind, and now you've lost your fold equity. You're kind of done. So here, do you want to shove 5-8 offsuit into this guy? I would say you have to. You probably have to at this point. You know what? Here's another thing that I kind of forgot to add into this tricks of the trade slide that you'll see in a second. But here's another thing you can do if you're faced with this spot. Obviously, if you shove all in, you're going to get called, and you have no fold equity. A nice little thing to do, especially for guys that doing it against recreational players, other players who don't really know necessarily what's going on. I would limp in here. Actually, I would limp in, and if this Vaza guy he checks, I would shove any flop, and that way we can actually get some fold equity maybe on the flop. Obviously, if we limp and he shoves, we have to call, so don't ever think about limp folding. I would limp to try to get some fold equity on the flop. I would only do that against other bad players, but that's, again, another little trick you can do when you're sitting here with two big blinds behind. So you have to play that here, and this is what I was pointing out before. Okay, we're sitting here with Jack-8 suited. With a 1,300 stack. It's actually a half decent hand for this spot. We saw before that this guy did not shove into this player, so we can't rely on him to do that now and that these guys are going to do battle. We can't rely on that. We can't just hope that somebody's going to bust before us. So again, take the opportunity, do it yourself, shove it all in. The beauty is, if we shove this all in, we actually have a half decent hand. Maybe we get this guy to fold and we go all in. Maybe we have some fold equity versus this guy. Who knows? Even if we don't, our hand's going to be okay. And if we can win this pot, then we put him in the short stack position. So it's really a matter of kind of looking at what things mean after you fold and after you shove, how things change. And this changes for the worse when we fold, because what are we really hoping for? And now you're just hoping Jack-6, and so that bubble. He ended up bubbling this game. And I think this is a game where we didn't have to bubble necessarily. Who knows how it would have turned out? I have no idea. But obviously you saw there were about 3 or 4 spots that looked like half decent spots to help ourselves stay afloat. And if we're sitting there with a 3 to 4K stack the entire time, we don't need a huge stack, but we could put more pressure on the shorter guy, and maybe this is an in the money that you add into your session. That would be that'd be extremely important to your overall profitability. So I know we're kind of talking subjectively, intuitively, not necessarily getting into a lot of calculations, but looking at negative EV spots is a difficult thing to do with pure calculations. A lot has to do with intuition, game flow, and understanding how to not find yourself in that desperation zone of the 5 big blind area. and how to, like I said, stay afloat. So those are a few examples I wanted to go through. Now I want to talk about some tricks of the trade. Um, Here's some things you can do when you're short to maybe give yourself some extra fold equity, be a little bit tricky. When you're short stacks, obviously that's what we're talking about. 4 to 6 big blinds, right? And this is great for when you're under the gun as well. I really like doing this when you're under the gun. Instead of just shoving all in, just raise to like 2.5 to 3x, because what it looks like, if anybody is playing a bunch of tables popping up right in front of them, they're not going to necessarily see every single time that it's a short stack shove. I know I don't. Um, I know plenty of times I got a bunch of tables up and I see a raise and I'll just instantly fold and I'll move to the next hand. But if I really looked closer, that raise came from like a 4 or 5 big blind stack. Okay? So the same thing can happen if other people aren't paying attention at your table or they're multi-tabling. They're not going to see a short stack desperation shove with 5 big blinds. They might just see a raise. So maybe you get a few extra folds that way. Then when you're ultra short, like with you have 2 or 3 big blinds where you have absolutely no fold equity, I don't necessarily like to shove all in right there, because if you shove all in for 2 or 3 big blinds, then players on the button or the small blind, they might just call, and then the big blind will call. Next thing you know, you're in like a 3 or 4 way pot. Um, what I like to do is just limp, because for other players that see that, they might say, oh, those are just dead chips. I'm going to ISO shove over the top or ISO raise. And what that means for you is you hopefully get into an isolated pot just against one opponent where maybe you have 2 live cards. Even if you're sitting there with deuce 7 offsuit, limp in, and or if deuce 7, maybe the next hand was going to be a better hand anyway, so you might want to wait. But even if you have like a hand that's half decent, like a queen 8, just limp in, let somebody else shove. Next thing you know, hopefully you're in a pot with in an isolated pot, which was one other player, and with 2 live cards. So that could be a nice way to stay alive as well. And the other one that I forgot to add on here, which I talked about earlier, is again, if you're really short with no fold equity in the small blind, go ahead and limp in against a bad player that might check behind. Let the big blind check and shove any flop. So that might be a way to kind of create some fold equity for yourself where you might not otherwise have it. So with that being said, I'll kind of leave you there. Again, this was more of I think more of a discussion about the concept of negative EV shoves, when you need to start shoving wider. Don't necessarily look at your ICM calculator and you're sitting there with 5 big blinds and you're looking for a plus EV shove. Just understand, regardless of whether you want to go to negative 0.2, negative 0.3, forget the number for a second. Just think to yourself, I need to take that negative EV shove now, because in the future I may be faced with a more negative EV spot because I'm going to have less chips, less of a stack. I might lose my fold equity. So you want to preserve that fold equity ideally and give yourself a better shot at more plus EV plays in the future. So understand the game flow. Understand, when I talked about that, I'm not going to repeat myself again with it, but because I just keep rambling on. But understand how the game is progressing. Who's at your table? What are you allowed to get away with? Obviously, you saw in that bubble that guy to our left wasn't doing the job for us and shoving into that other short stack. So you have to realize that, understand that you probably can't just play the folding game and hope to fold your way into the money. You're going to have to pick a spot here or there to just stay afloat. So with that being said, keep that in mind for when you're short stack. Figure out. Make sure that you're not hurting yourself by losing all your fold equity and just folding away the game. Try to find those few spots to, again, stay afloat. So good luck at the table, guys. Hopefully that was helpful. Maybe this is an area you're struggling, but any questions, post them below this video, and I'll do my best to respond as soon as possible. So thanks and good luck. See ya.